Hi YouTube, Darth here. It's been a busy week on the Battlefield 4 community test environment, and Dice LA has not only got a few updates in for the spring patch, but there are a couple of nice surprises this week too. In addition to the new weapons, pretty much every weapon in the game has got some new balance and attention this week. Overall, with the last week's tweaks to the headshot multiplier, changes to suppression and recoil this week, and new damage models, Battlefield 4 is starting to put real definition back into its gunplay. But I'll go over all that and more in this week's CTE Sunday, so let's get started. After having been melted into near nothingness, suppression is back in Battlefield 4. What do I mean by that? Well, Dice LA has changed suppression to now affect weapon recoil. Pretty much across the board, all weapons will be harder to control when a soldier is under the effects of suppression. I'd compare this favorably to previous implementations of suppression, and as an example, in Battlefield 3, your bullets would go into seemingly random directions because of suppression. You really had no ability to control this by controlling your weapon. As an experiment, try shooting slug rounds in Battlefield 3 while under suppression. You'll see what I'm talking about. The CTE implementation of suppression gives the player control over the mechanic by better controlling their weapon. Where bullets are going are affected by your ability to aim under suppression, and they don't exhibit uncharacteristic behavior after leaving your gun. So no more magic bullets. With the new implementation, when you're under the effect of suppression, you'll experience additional recoil, spread increase, and maximum spread. Additionally, weapons that deliver suppression are affected more quickly and affected more by suppression in general. So as an example, an MG4 is going to feel the effects of suppression a lot quicker than a sidearm. As part of the spring patch, Dice LA is beginning a fairly massive rebalance of the weapons in the game. For now, this has meant making some broad strokes on every weapon in the game and some more specific touches on very specific weapons. I'll break them down by category in this segment of today's update. Assault rifles across the board received increased maximum spreads and typically more recoil. I'm demonstrating this with the M416, a relatively stable platform in Battlefield 4 at 0.1 left, 0.3 right, and 0.32 up. It fires in a fairly predictable pattern with a controllable spread, and I usually fire this weapon in bursts of about 5 to 6 rounds. On the CTE, as part of the larger assault rifle change, the M416's values are now different. Now it has a recoil of 0.12 left, 0.28 right, and retains its upwards recoil of 0.32. The general pattern is pretty similar, but you'll notice that increased spread of the weapon as we reach higher and higher volumes of fire. If you're already practicing good habits with the rifles and you're used to bursting and tap firing your weapons, you really won't notice the effect too much. But combined with increased headshot multipliers, this is going to start building a skill gap between players. Next, the LMGs received a number of interesting improvements. The first is in creating a difference between magazine-fed LMGs and belt-fed ones. I believe I mentioned this positive difference in Battlefield 3 versus Battlefield 4 in my Future of Battlefield video, and it looks like Dice LA is creating similar categories for these two weapons now in Battlefield 4. Magazine-fed LMGs are now going to be the middle ground between the assault rifles and the belt-fed weapons. In general, the magazine-fed weapons will have better recoil and better spread recovery than the belt-fed LMGs. I have to say that this is going to be a great change, and particularly welcome when it feels like there is hardly a reason to choose lower reserve bullet counts over the belt-fed weapons in Battlefield 4 on live. Now on the CTE, players have a real choice. As for specific weapon touch-ups to the LMGs, two magazine-fed weapons received some pretty major changes to their statistics. The first is that the U100 had its bullet magazine corrected from 45 to 30. If you're wondering why Dice LA would choose to nerf what is arguably the worst LMG in the game, it's because they dramatically decreased the recoil on this weapon from 0.2 degrees left and right deviation to nearly 0.09 degrees. The upwards recoil was also decreased from 0.25 degrees to 0.2. This now makes it the most accurate LMG in the game. Next up is my old love-hate LMG, the RPK-74M. This weapon took a slight hit in overall magazine size, taking it from 45 bullets to only 40, but it received a major damage upgrade. Dice LA has created a new damage bullet model for this weapon, and it now does a maximum of 30 damage and decreases to 20 over its fall-off distance. This is roughly a midway point between the higher damage M60, PKP, and M240B with the benefits of a magazine-fed LMG. I have to say that the RPK-74M is now an exceptionally good LMG for players that prize accuracy. But before I move on, I would also like to point out that the changes this week affect belt-fed weapons in a pretty substantial way. Because of the increase to the spread per shot and maximum spread of these weapons, sustained bullet hosing is no longer a viable tactic, particularly at range. In this example, I'm looking at the MG4 from Battlefield 4 Live and the CTE. You'll notice on the CTE that the bullet spread is much increased from its live counterpart. Draw this out to longer ranges and the need to tap fire these weapons becomes much more necessary. Nothing quite as dramatic changed with the PDWs for engineers. Like the assault rifles, they've generally been made harder to control, but they've also been given general spread improvements and should be more versatile while on the move. You'll see in this comparison of the MP7 on live and on the CTE that the maximum spread has increased pretty dramatically, but again, the overall weapon changes will be better for players who don't spray. Additionally, 9mm PDWs suppress more than on live, as they had previously been using sidearm values for suppression. As for specific PDWs, the JS2 has been given a new damage model and now does a maximum of 31 damage and a minimum of 5. This brings its minimum time to kill in line with the AS-Val and SR2, but its range potential is now extremely limited. The damage increase gives it a lot of killing power at close range with its extremely large magazine and makes it pretty unique and viable among the PDWs. As for the bolt actions and DMRs, the weapons that saw changes were the M39, SKS, SV98, SR338, and SVD12. In general, the DMRs got better spread recovery while their overall recoil and spread was made harder to control. The SV98 has had its upwards recoil increased from 0.25 degrees per shot to 1, but its recoil recovery has also increased substantially. Again, these changes promote well-aimed shots over spam. Shotguns saw near universal improvements as the semi-automatic shotguns were given slight buffs to spread penalties while moving, and pump-action shotguns were given enormous bonuses to spread penalty while moving. For example, the 870 moving spread was reduced to only 25% of its current values. While I don't think this is going to make these shotguns particularly amazing, it will definitely cut down on the amount of confusion when firing these weapons on the move and their projectiles leaving the expected cone of fire entirely. Finally, we have the sidearms, which got some changes, some improvements, and some nerfs to offset those improvements. Across the board, all sidearms had their fall-off distance improved, and damage now starts to fall off from 10 meters, whereas before it was 8 meters. The automatic and semi-automatic sidearms have also been given spread improvements to their minimum spread. However, like most other bullet sprayers in this patch, their maximum spread has been increased. To offset this, the G18 had its magazine capacity reduced from 20 to 18 bullets, and the 93R has gone from 21 bullets to 16. The CZ75 has gained a bullet and now carries 13, while the Deagle and the Magnums have had a magazine removed from their spare capacity. The reason given as to why the Magnum max capacity was changed was to discourage using the sidearms as a primary weapon. Now that you've got all those weapon changes behind you, let's take a look at where you'll be using them in the upcoming spring patch. Gunmaster. The new game mode was unleashed in the previous week, but this week DICE LA took some of the recommended changes and put them into the game. First up, the elevators on all the maps have been disabled. Additionally, the battle pickups have been disabled. In addition to these mechanical fixes, there were a ton of smaller tweaks to the UI, messaging, music, and other general polish for this game mode. If you're into a fun spin on TDM, you should definitely give this game mode a try when it goes live. Let's not forget the new weapons in this update, and while the most visible changes this week were cosmetic, there were some balance changes as well. First thing you'll notice is that all the weapons are now textured and are no longer their basic white model. But the meat of this week's changes are the mechanical updates. In response to feedback, the AN-94's delay between bursts has been reduced. The AN-94 has gone from 600 rounds per minute in burst to about 700 rounds per minute while in burst. There may yet be further increases in updates to come. To offset this, the AN-94's reload time is increased from 2.05 seconds to 2.4 seconds when there's a round left in the chamber, and to a pretty rough 3.5 seconds when there is no round left. My advice would be to remember to carefully time your reloads. The Groza 1 had its rate of fire reduced from 800 rounds per minute to just 725. To compensate, its spread recovery was slightly increased, and its reload time was decreased on the short to 2.5 seconds from 2.6 and increased on the long from 3.3 seconds to 3.35. Its twin, the Groza 4, was hit pretty hard this week. While receiving a slight damage upgrade from 26 to 27 max damage and slightly better recoil while moving, it now has a worst-in-class reload of 2.9 seconds short and 3.75 seconds long. I'm not really a fan of CQB-style weapons with exceptionally long reload times. Combine that with a tiny magazine size of only 20 and an unimpressive time to kill, and I think this weapon is a real loser when stacked up against other PDWs. The L86A1 saw some pretty hefty nerfs this week. Its recoil multiplier was increased while standing and on the move in all three stances, while aiming down sights, and when hip firing. The reload on the weapon went from 2.5 seconds on the short to 2.6 seconds, and the empty reload is now 4 seconds. I'm not really sure where this leaves the weapon, but it does remain an interesting bullpup amongst a category that has only one other bullpup, the QBB95-1. Hopefully the L86A1 does not become as irrelevant as that weapon. Finally, the Mare's Leg saw some adjustments this past week. It had its zeroing removed, and it went from a respectable 200 rounds per minute to a much slower 90. Additionally, the default scope was changed to the iron sights from the 8X. Finally, as with every week, several additional cleanups went into the game. Dice LA tweaked the night vision to work better on non-night maps, the EOD bot kill card was fixed, and the frame history time was reset to launch values to support the newly updated netcode hit registration. To clarify, the FHC was reset because it was no longer necessary with the new system. So that's a lot of changes for this past week, and we've got more to look forward to next week. In addition, keep your eyes on Friday, as supposedly we'll be getting a first look at Battlefront. As with every week, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about the current direction of the community test environment. If you're new around here, please take a moment to check out my channel and consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.